So, hey guys, hopefully everyone can hear me okay and see my screen, I think. Should be like a blue slide.
Yep, we got it.
Cool. I don't have too many slides, so don't worry. Most of this is going to be sort of demos and looking at code and stuff. But I just kind of wanted to set the scene a little bit in terms of what we're talking about. So I don't know how many of you read the description on the website, but basically my aim tonight, we're talking about RAD server. My aim really, I mean, Embarcadero obviously would love you to use RAD server. That's great. And it's probably one of the solutions you should look at if you were looking at doing this, but there are others as well. My main aim tonight is to, I guess, make people, if you're not already, make people realize that building REST APIs and REST-based applications is totally achievable to someone whose only real experience is building Delphi, client-server apps and that sort of thing. Yeah, a lot of people I've heard from sort of seem to think that it's this other skill that ordinary mortals don't have, and that somehow it's hard and it's esoteric and it's complicated. It's not. I mean, it's like anything. You can go deep into it, and there are subtleties about it, but I guess what I'm hoping to show tonight is that there isn't a very large barrier to entry at all. That if you already know how to build Delphi database applications, then the step to then start building REST APIs is a pretty small step. Yeah. So that's my aim. I've just got a few slides initially, just so that we can all agree on what we're talking about. What is a REST API? How does it work at a high level? All that sort of stuff. And then we'll spend the rest of the session sort of building things and looking at things. Yeah. I'm assuming if anyone is going to have questions during this, they're just going to yell at me, because I'll be looking at the screen, not necessarily looking in the chat window or whatever. So let's do it that way. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look. I stole these slides shamelessly from someone else because I thought they were reasonable. If we just have a quick look, I don't want to spend ages talking about history, but probably most of us have been around long enough to know that this idea of client-server applications, where you've got a reasonably fat, I think was the word they used to use, fat client, where your data access logic and your user interface logic and everything was all mixed up together and connected directly to a database. That was through the 80s. Many of us built a bunch of those systems, and many of us still maintain systems like that. That's the nature of technology. It doesn't just go away when something new comes along. But things did progress after that, and through the 90s, 2000s, we started looking at distributed applications, which were 3-tier applications or multi-tier applications, where the user interface layer became a little thinner and the data access layer and the business layer kind of moved off into another process, maybe a process sitting on a server somewhere in the back office or the data center or whatever. Yeah. And so if whereas the first one we were talking about, that's your classic Delphi using the BDE to talk to SQL Server or MySQL or whatever on the back end. Yeah. Whereas this second one is if you've built data snap applications, for example, or Midas applications, that's the kind of thing where more of your data access layer and your business layer was put off on the middle tier. And, why did we do this? Well, having a thinner user interface meant that when business logic changes happened, and data access logic changes happened, we didn't have to go and update all of our users' machines with a new version of the client. We could just update the middle layer here. Yeah. Also, it potentially meant that more of the processing was happening in the middle tier. Yeah. And so we could make the servers in here nice and beefy and give them heaps of RAM and heaps of processors. And we didn't have to, and the application would potentially speed up rather than going and upgrading all of our end users' machines. Yeah. So there's a few different reasons we used to do this. Like anything, it also got more complicated. There was more opportunities for things to break, but that's the nature of the beast. In recent years, and by recent years, it's not that recent, really. It's probably 10 or 15 years, maybe. This has changed again because, we've got to all keep ourselves in work, and we've got to keep changing systems and coming up with new ways to do the same old stuff. Where it's the same kind of idea, but rather than having this monolithic middle tier layer here with all of your business logic and all of your data access logic, we started splitting that up into, what became known as microservices. And so your application, your user interface may actually talk to many of these microservices to perform its task. Yeah. So whereas before here, if we were building if we're building a CRM, yeah, our monolithic middle tier might have all of our logic about the customers and the orders and the product information and all of that stuff. Yeah. Whereas when we move to microservices, we start to see each of these microservices splitting up along sort of business domains. So maybe you have one microservice which represents all of your core customer information. And you might have another microservice which represents all of your product information. Yep. Details of SKUs and all pricing and all that sort of stuff. And then, then you might have another one which represents your, I don't know, I'm making this up, finance organization. And so in order to get something done, your user interface might invoke something in this microservice, which might call off to this microservice to get some more information to fulfill the request. Yeah. Why? Well, it's a good question because there's definitely some downsides to it. It's more complicated. Every one of these lines is an opportunity for something to break. Usually these things are running on different machines. So networks can go down, machines can go down. There's definitely a downside to it. Usually the reason why people did it was for scale. Yeah. Not only, there's other things, but the big one was scale. If we really need to support lots and lots of end users, not talking dozens or hundreds of end users, but potentially thousands of end users, then we need the ability to, we can't just do what we did over here with this monolithic middle tier and just keep giving it a bigger machine with more RAM and more cores. Yeah. Because eventually you hit the limit. You can only shove so much RAM into a single machine. So you need to start running multiple machines. Yeah. And load balancing across them. And maybe one of these, maybe the customer microservice is used a lot more frequently than the product catalog microservice. So you might want to run 10 copies of the customer microservice, but only 3 copies of the product catalog microservice. Yeah. So it gives you flexibility. Yeah. Anyway, all this was going on. One of the other things that was happening at the same time, obviously, was a move from, rich desktop clients through to web-based clients and then through to mobile clients. And so as the need to start exposing these systems out to a larger audience on the internet, that scale requirement became even more critical. The other thing that became critical was the ability to have lots of different sorts of clients. And so, having if you cast your mind back, having a DCOM, if you remember that, a DCOM-based system was fine if you had, back in the day, was fine if you had Windows clients, but if you had Linux or Mac clients, then it started to become a bit trickier. Yeah, so things like Java came along. So really, this is kind of one of the states we're at now, yeah, where more and more applications are starting to be architected this way, yeah. Now, you might be sitting there going, well, that's all great, but what's that got to do with me? I have a Delphi application that services medical practices, or I have one that services some other vertical industry or whatever it is. And I don't have tens of thousands of people trying to hit my system all at the same time. Yeah. There are other benefits to this as well. Yeah. People didn't just do this for scale. Increasingly, people started doing it for flexibility as well. The flexibility to, once you've split these microservices up, they become much smaller. And so they become easier to maintain and change without all of these impacts. Yeah, when this is just the product catalog, we can go in there and make changes in that and roll out new versions much easier than when it was all bundled up into this monolith, or even this monolith over here on the left, and needing to deploy the entire system again rather than just rolling out a small microservice. Yeah. As I said, the other part was about supporting lots of different languages. We might have JavaScript web clients. We might have mobile clients written in Android and in Swift or Objective-C. We might have desktop clients. We might have other servers that want to call into our microservice. Yeah. So apart from just scale, it also gives you the flexibility to support a wide range of different clients. Yeah. So REST is probably the most, these days, it's not the only, but it's probably one of the more popular ways of doing this. Yeah. Now, if you haven't played with REST much, it's not a million miles from what you might know from DataSnap or from something else. But it borrows heavily a lot of web technologies. Yeah. And I don't mean like HTML. It doesn't borrow that, but a lot of the networking technologies and transports and those sorts of things. Yeah. So the idea with a REST architecture, and I know this has got the little RAD server icon on it, but this doesn't have to be RAD server. This is just talking about REST. Is you have your server somewhere with all of your, with your microservices running on it, and that might actually be multiple servers. And it's talking to its database or databases and potentially other third-party services. And then you also have your clients, and they could be desktop apps or tablets or mobile phones or web clients, whatever they are. Yep. And when these clients want to make calls on your microservices, it's using HTTP, or more realistically, HTTPS. Yeah. And we'll see in a second, it is really leveraging HTTP, including all of the different verbs, get requests and post requests and put and delete and patch and those sorts of things. Yep. And the data, in addition to that, the actual data that it's sending and receiving over HTTP is, well, it's mostly JSON. It doesn't have to be. There are REST APIs out there that use XML, but these days they're pretty few and far between. I think I've only hit one in the last few years. Like going further back, I hit a few more, but you don't see them in the wild very often anymore. So it's usually just JSON that is being sent backwards and forwards. Yep. And so if you think about, sometimes analogies you can only stretch them so far, but if you think about your microservices, almost kind of like you think about an object. Yeah. We won't take that too far, but if you think about an object, you might have a customer object. Yeah. And you might have, in that object, you might have the ability to say, get me the customer details, and set the customer details, read them and write them and update. You might have an update customer, you might have a delete customer, that kind of thing. So usually, read, what is it? CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Yeah. Well, you can do, you have that in REST as well, but it's a little bit different. Instead of having methods on your object that you're calling, so this is my customer object, and we have create and read and update and delete methods. Instead, we have a resource. So we would have a customer resource. Yeah. If it helps, just pretend it's an object, or some people pretend just while they're starting, they pretend it's a database table. It doesn't really matter. But just remember, in the REST world, it's referred to as a resource. So we might have a customer resource, but we don't then call methods on it. We send, depending on the HTTP verb that we use, so the type of request that we send, it does different things. So for example, if we have a user's resource, and we send a GET request, that's going to give us back a list of all the users. But if we send a POST request to that exact same resource, still going to the user's resource, but if instead of sending GET, we send a POST request, it's going to create a user. And the information that it's going to use to create that user is carried in the HTTP request in a JSON structure, JSON object, or potentially more than one object. Does that make sense? So it's kind of the combination of the resource, in this case users, and then the type of HTTP request, or what's referred to as the verb, whether it's GET or POST or put and delete and whatever else. So for example, like I said, users, send it a GET request, you'll get a list of users. Send it a POST request within the body, the details of the user you want to create, it'll create it. And then if it does it successfully, you'll get back an HTTP response code, 200. You might have seen 404s when you're browsing the web. If the server can't be found, you type in an address and you send it, that's actually a GET request, a HTTP GET request. If it can't find what the URL, what does URL stand for? I think it's Universal Resource Locator. Resource. Same resource we're talking about here. So if it can't find the resource, it'll give you back, what, a 404? Am I remembering that correctly? Well, REST uses those same codes, HTTP codes, to indicate the success or otherwise of your requests that you've sent. If you send a GET request and it's to your user's resource, and it finds, it works out that that's a valid resource and sends you the results back, that'll be a 200. If there's some sort of error when you're processing, you'll get a 500. So it'll use those those response codes as to indicate success or error. And you can see we use the URL to specify the resource. So I said up here, if we send a GET request to just the user's resource, we'll get a list of users. But if we send...
Excuse me, Malcolm, can you maximize your screen, please?
Yeah, I can try.
Thank you.
Yep, okay. So if we send a GET request to the user's resource, we'll get back a list of users. But if we send a GET request to the users / and then specify a particular ID, we'll get back just that single user that matches that ID. Equally, if we send a put request to users with a specific ID, and in the body of the put request, we put in a JSON object the data we want to change, it will update that user if it finds it. Equally, send a delete request to a particular users / and then the ID of the user, whatever the primary key we've decided is of the user, it'll delete that user. Make sense? Okay, so I guess the key thing here is it heavily leverages HTTP, HTTPS. The verbs, the resources, and the response codes. Now, and a few times in there, I said, we'll send in the details of the user we want to create as a JSON packet in the request. Well, here's an example of a JSON object that we're sending in. You can see it's got name value. It opens with curly brackets, so it's a JSON object. We've got name value pairs for user ID, name, email, blah, blah, blah. So they're all sort of simple types, strings and numbers and Booleans. But then when we get down here to hobbies, we've got an array of simple types, video games, cooking and gardening. Then down here, the addresses is actually an array. It's a name value pair, but the value is another array, but it's not an array of simple types. It's an array of JSON objects. So here we've got 2 addresses in this array, with street and postal code and city. Yep. So you can have reasonably structured and complicated data in the packets if you want, which is good because HTTP requests over the internet are expensive. They can be slow, latency involved. Rather than sending a dozen requests over to create the customer and create the first address and create the second address and create, the first contact and the second contact, we probably want to bundle that up into a single packet and send it in one request. So it's minimizing the number, the chattiness of the requests over the internet. Yeah. Make sense? Okay. We're getting close to the end. Don't worry. And then we'll do some demos. All right. So now we get to RAD server. Now, RAD server is one of the ways of doing this in Delphi. Yeah. It's one of the way, it's the way kind of in the box, but there are others. There's, there's a couple of different open source projects in the Delphi community to do the same sort of thing. But RAD server's in the box. Yeah, I'll give you some links to the other ones at the end. Like anything, you should check them out and decide which one works better for you. The key thing with RAD server, and I have a little bit of familiarity with the other ones, but maybe they do these things as well. They don't do some of these, or they didn't do some of these when I played with them. But the key thing about RAD server is it tries to let you do 2 things. It tries to give you a bunch of the services surrounding the API, the business logic that you might need. We'll look at some of those in a second, rather than you having to write them. So you can just focus on your business logic and they provide you with these other things around it. The second thing about it is they try to let you leverage both your skills in Delphi or CBuilder. If I say Delphi, I mean Delphi or CBuilder. So your skills in Delphi, but also your existing code out of Delphi. So we'll see during these demos how you can take data access logic and business logic out of your existing Delphi applications and then expose them through a REST API. Yeah. So that's the idea with RAD server. You'll see Embarcadero refer to it as a MEEP. I feel ridiculous every time I call it a MEEP, but this stands for Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. It's a REST server, but things of you can't sell a REST server, but you can sell a MEEP. So now it's a MEEP. Anyway, so like I said, you can migrate your data access logic to a REST service. You can build very easily, and I'll show you this. You can build VCL clients for your REST server or your RAD server REST server. Anyway, say that fast. You can build FireMonkey clients for it, but you can also, there's nothing about your RAD server REST server that ties it to Delphi. Yeah, it can be used from anything that can talk REST. PHP, Python, C#, Java, you name it. I've never built a client in Rust, but if Rust supports REST, then you can do it to your RAD server client. Yep. We definitely have customers where we've been involved with a few customers, and quite a few now, where they've got existing systems written in Delphi, point of sale systems or retail management systems or medical practice management systems, and we've come on board to help them crack that system open to allow web clients and mobile clients and that sort of stuff written in other languages. And so plenty of times we've worked with, they might bring on a team, 2 or 3 guys who are building a JavaScript React web application, web front end, and we provide them with the the details of the RAD server REST interface that we're exposing, and they just start building, and they don't know anything about Delphi. They don't care that it's written in Delphi. It's just a REST interface, and they get to work and build it. Yeah. So it does open up your systems to other development environments if you want to. And so, you know, they can start taking this application, which used to be closed into just a bunch of Delphi developers, and start opening it up so that they can access it from mobile and web and whatever, written in anything you like, including Delphi. Yeah. And one of the things I really like about it, we'll talk more about this later, but the sort of the deployment scales. You can deploy, once you've written your business logic in RAD server, you can deploy it on everything from a single machine where the server and the client and the database are all on a single machine, all the way through to deploying it in the cloud, running on Kubernetes in Azure or AWS or whatever, running on Linux servers with, you know, dozens of servers if you want, and kind of everything in between. Yeah. So it's nice and scalable. We've got one customer where they're increasingly more of their customers are using their cloud solution, you know, where they have this multi-tenant environment written in RAD server, where their customers can just directly connect to their server. It's a farm management system. But they have some customers, a shrinking number, but it's shrinking slowly. A few years ago, it was much larger, where the internet connectivity was not terribly reliable out on their farms. And so they needed to have a version that was where the RAD server and everything was running locally on the machine in the farmer's office out the back, and then could occasionally connect up and synchronize to the cloud. Yep. So you can deploy RAD server from that kind of tiny little bit all the way up through to a massive cloud environment, and your business logic doesn't change. It's the exact same binaries with your business logic that you deploy to all of them. Yeah. So to me, that's kind of cool. You've written it once and you've got that flexibility, especially if you're in a sort of vertical, if you're in you know, an ISV with a vertical solution, vertical market solution that you sell to customers, that gives you a lot of deployment flexibility. Okay. So last couple of slides and then we'll build stuff. I said before that one of the things that RAD server tries to do is let you focus on your business logic, and it provides you with a bunch of services around the outside. So this is what some of these services are. So for example, if you're exposing this on the internet, you are going to want authentication and security, right? People need to log in to access your API, probably, unless you're building some sort of public API. And then you want to be able to limit what things they have access to. You know, maybe this person logs in and they can view the product catalog, but they can't change it. That this other person in their organization logs in and they've got rights to change products and create new products and delete products and those sorts of things. So all of that is actually provided in RAD server. You just turn it on. And then you go through your resources and say, this one is visible to this group and this one's visible to this group, and you know, this one can have a get request but not a put request, and all that sort of stuff. Yep. So access control is all built in, including integration with Active Directory. So if your organization or customer or whatever stores all their users in Active Directory or LDAP, that's built in, so you can just connect it up to that. Same sort of thing, analytics, so you can see how many people are calling which APIs and how frequently and where you're getting failures and that sort of stuff. Push notifications, multi-tenancy support. So if you've got 2 or 3 customers and you don't want to have a server each, you can just stick them all in one server, and the concept of a tenant is already built in, so it can separate them out. They don't trot on each other's data. I think there's one more slide. And more stuff, you know, light deployment, which is that single machine deployment I'm talking about. You know, custom authentication, if you want to change that, a whole bunch of other things. So the point is, you focus on your business logic and then you turn on these services that you need and don't turn on the ones you don't need. Yeah. Okay. Right. That's the last slide before we build stuff. So let me get out of here. and let's jump across to Delphi. So I want to build a few things, but first I want to, I've had a few people who say that they load up one of the sample applications for RAD server and they press F9 and it starts up and it suddenly starts asking them all these questions and they don't know any of the answers. And so then they cancel out of it and stop looking. Yeah. So I've purposely deleted my RAD server setup here so that I can just show you what you would see if you went home and grabbed this source code. I'll give you the link to the source code later. If you went home and ran this stuff, what you would see when you first ran it. Yeah. So the first thing, apart from what's this? This is RAD Studio 11.3, I think. Oh, actually, on the slides, I should have talked about it. Well, you may see it as an advantage, you may see it as a disadvantage. That people have different opinions. One thing about RAD server compared to other Delphi solutions for building REST servers is it's a commercial product. Yeah, it's licensed. Wait an hour. Should be finished in an hour, surely. It's a commercial product. Yeah. So whereas the other ones are open source solutions, RAD server is a commercial product. Now, some places like that because it means they've got support, but other places don't like it because it means they've got to buy licenses. Yeah. So let me fill you in on the license story because it's not as bad as people think. Remember I said you can deploy it from single machine, single desktop, everything on the one machine all the way through. So at the low end, that single machine server and client and database all on one machine, that's called RAD Server Lite. That's free to deploy. Yep. I'll give you in the resources link, I'll give you at the end, there's a link in there so you can go off and see, it shows you how to download RAD Server Lite. Yep. But that's free to deploy. Yep. I think free to deploy if you have enterprise. Yeah. So that's probably the one restriction. It's enterprise and above. Yeah. Then if you want to put RAD server on a single server and have multiple people connect to it, there's what's called, funnily enough, a RAD server single server license for that. So you can buy that, or one comes free with your enterprise license. So if you have Delphi Enterprise, you've already got a deployment license for a single server of RAD server. Yeah. If you and that can, you can put that in the cloud, you can run it on a machine in your own data center, whatever you like. I should have mentioned the developer version, which we'll be using here, just comes with Delphi, so you don't have to worry about that. You get a single server license with Delphi Enterprise. You get a multi-server license with Delphi Architect. So if you then want to run not one server, but have multiple instances of, multiple VMs running on AWS or something like that, and load balance your requests across them, then you can buy a multi-server license, or one comes with Architect. So for example, one of the customers we've got had 3 or 4 developers, I think, building their application. That gave them, I think there were 4. So that gave them 4 deployment licenses for their RAD server solution that they were building. Took them a long time to need 4 because one was handling a lot of customers, but as it grew, they got to 2 and 3 and they had licenses for that. But then as they started to grow faster, they realized that this was a limitation they didn't want. They wanted to be able to scale up the number of servers during busy times and then drop them back down during quiet times. Yeah. So they wanted a multi-instance license. We priced it up for them, but then at around the same time that we priced it up for them, Embarcadero introduced this thing where it just comes with Architect. So instead of buying the license, they just upgraded one of the guys on their team to have Delphi Architect instead of Enterprise, and suddenly they had their multi-instance license. Yeah. So if you've got no money to spend on deployment, then you should probably look at the open source projects that I can point you at later. If you have some money to spend, but who has heaps? None of us have heaps. If you've got some money to spend on deployment licenses, you probably should still look at the open source solutions because they're not automatically bad. But if you decide you do want to use RAD server, getting the licenses with your Delphi purchase is definitely a cheaper way to go than buying them individually. Yeah. Anyway, if someone gets to that point, we can talk about it. All right. So the first thing I want to do is just show you how you might start building something. Yep. So this will be a really silly demo, but it'll take you through exactly what you'll see when you first try to build something. Yeah. So if I say file new other, and I'll come down here to RAD server, and I want to create a new RAD server package. So the first thing to realize is, as the name suggests, these are BPL files. These are Delphi packages or CBuilder packages. Yep. So your logic that you build gets compiled into a package, and then you deploy that into RAD server, whether it's on Windows or Linux, on that single server Lite, RAD server Lite, all the way through to multi-instance. It's the same BPL that you carry around. Yeah. So let's create a RAD server package. You can create an empty one, but that's not terribly interesting. So let's create a package with a resource to start with. Okay. Let's say, I'll say for my resource name, I'll call it my, we'll use some better names later on, but I'll call it my ADUG resource. Yep. That resource maps to a Delphi class. Yeah. So that class can either just be a descendant of a data module, or sorry, not a descendant, an actual data module if you want to use non-visual controls. So if you want to drag data access controls out onto it, you can make it a data module, or it can just be a unit if you're just going to implement it in code. Yeah. Doesn't make any real difference apart from that. So we'll create a data module. We'll say next. Just to get started, we'll get it to create some sample endpoints for us. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. Yep. So we'll get it to create some sample endpoints. You can get it to automatically generate the necessary attributes so that you can generate documentation as well, which I'm going to turn off this time, but I'll turn it on later. I'll turn it off this time just because I want to keep it simple. But it is really useful because remember I talked about how we set up that RAD server for the customer, and then they had a team of React developers building a web front end. The RADs, when they wanted to understand what this resource was, what fields it has, what data it contained, all that sort of stuff, we didn't have to tell them. They could just look at the documentation that RAD server served them, dynamically, based on the code. So you can turn that on. I'll turn it off this time around. So let's click finish, and you'll see what we ended up with, because I selected a data module, is we end up with a package project. Yep. And it contains one unit, which is this unit 6. And if we have a look at the source code for them, is that code readable? I'm going to assume it is, unless we
yes.
Someone yells out. Okay. You'll see it's actually a data module. Yeah. It's not some sort of weird RAD server data module or something like that. It's just a data module. Yep. But we've got a few of these attributes scattered around in it. So the fact that this attribute resource name ADUG is in front of this tells us that, or this tells RAD server to treat this as a resource called ADUG. Yeah. And then we have a few of these sample methods that it created for us. Yeah. Got one called get. You won't be shocked to realize that if I send a get request to this resource, this is the method that will run. Yeah. And it passes in some context, which we'll go into later on, passes in the details of the request. Yeah. This T endpoint request. And lastly, it passes in a T endpoint response, this A response attribute. And it's our job in this method to fill out this response. We can read details of the request that came in, and we just have to fill out the response. Yeah. So if we have a look, here's the implementation of that get. This is a really simple one and not terribly interesting. We're just setting the body of our response. We're setting a value, and we're just creating a simple JSON string into that value. Yeah. Not terribly interesting, but the point I just want to get is the mapping of these, and then also show you how to invoke them and test them. Yeah. We've got a similar one called post. Yeah. So if we send a post request to this same ADUG resource, this is the method that'll run. Delete and put, but notice delete item and put item are, well, they're not just delete and put, they're put item. Yeah. So when we send a get, like we saw on the slide before, we're going to get the whole list back. But if we send a get request to the resource / and then an ID, we just get a single instance of that resource back. Yeah. So that's where this get item method comes in. That'll be the one that gets invoked if we get an identifier passed in. Yeah. Same with put and delete. Delete doesn't work unless you tell it what you want to delete. You've got to give it an ID. So these sample ones of put and delete are showing you how we can pass in an item. Yeah. Anyway, don't worry about it. There'll be more interesting code to look at, but that's really what it is. You get a resource, you can create one or more resource handlers. The start of them specify what type of HTTP request it is. So we could put another get in here called get details. Yep. And provided we gave it a different resource sort of suffix for the URL, we could call that one instead. Yeah. So you create as many or as few of these as you like to implement your resource. Yeah. So when we want to run it, all we have to do is hit F9. Yeah. Now, the first time you do this, it starts up the RAD Server Development Edition. The first time you do it, it realizes it's the first time and it doesn't have any configuration information. Yep. So it says, do you want to run a wizard to create it? So let's say yes. Let's say yes. Okay. And the first thing it says is specify a connection parameters for new EMS database. EMS, what's that? That's the old name for RAD server. So you'll still see EMS scattered around the place. It's just the old name for RAD server. Yep. So specify connection parameters for new RAD server database. So what's this database? It's not the database where you store all of your business information. Yeah. You might have that in SQL Server or Firebird or whatever you've got it in. Yeah. What this database is, remember I said that RAD server provides a whole bunch of services, user management, authentication, analytics, all that kind of stuff. This is the database where all that stuff's going to be installed. Yeah. And it wants Interbase for this. Yeah. So if you're using RAD server, you will be using Interbase. The license for Interbase is included in RAD server, so you don't have to license it separately. You can then choose to use that Interbase instance for your data as well if you want, but more often you have that off in whatever database you're already using for your application. Yeah. So you might have Interbase for all of the RAD server details, and then your actual business data is in Oracle or SQL Server or whatever. Yep. Okay. So let's make sure that we've got Interbase running. I'm just using the developer version that comes with Delphi. So this thing, if you just, once you've got Delphi installed, if you didn't install Interbase, you can just go to Tools, Manage Platforms. And when it comes up, go over to your additional options and choose Interbase Developer Edition. Yep, and that'll install it. Okay, once it's installed, if you just, let me close it here and I'll open it again just so you can see. If you just type Interbase, it should come up Interbase Server Manager. And we can say, if it's not already running, you can start it. Yeah, so if it comes up and it's currently stopped, you can start it. Okay. The only bit of information we need out of here is this, see where it says service and port, GDS_DB. That's the bit we need. That's the service name. GDS is the old original name of Interbase. I can't remember the Gunkel or something. Gunkel database server, I think it was originally before Borland started it. I could be getting that wrong. Anyway, so we want GDS_DB. Yeah. So if we go back to our wizard that's walking us through it, the server instance is that GDS_DB. Yeah. It wants to create a database. By default, it's going to call it emsserver.ib. By default, it's going to put it in this directory. And Interbase's default username and password is sysdba and master key. For development, that's probably fine. For deployment, definitely don't do that because it's very easy to find out that default name. So let's say next. We can get it to create some sample users. For test, you might want to do this. For deployment, you probably don't. So I'll get it to create this. I'll show you what it creates for you later on. This one is worth remembering. So this is a username and password for the RAD server console. So remember I said that it provides you with users and groups and analytics and all these other services. Well, there's a web-based console that it provides you that you can log into to add users, add groups, look at the analytics, all that kind of stuff. It also provides you a REST API to do those things as well if you want to do it through another interface. But this is the username and password it will use for the web console. Yeah. So console user, console pass. We'll remember that. We'll use it later. Okay. So we're just about finished. It's going to create the DB file, the ini file, and this registry entry. Let's say finish. It recognizes that we're doing a developer edition. So it's just saying, you're not going to have as many concurrent users and stuff as if you deployed it with a proper license. So that's fine. And it looks like it's all been done. Yeah. And it's set up some initial users, an initial tenant, a user called test with a password called test pass, an initial group and all that sort of stuff, because I ticked that box to say create me some sample users. Okay. Now, that's the stuff that'll happen just the first time you run it. And then our development environment will run. So now if I close this and run it again, we won't see all of that rubbish. Yep. It'll find those settings and just start our developer instance of RAD server. And if we look, after it starts up, it loads the config and checks the DB connection to Interbase and all that sort of stuff. Then it starts loading its own packages. And if you look at the names of some of these things, it's kind of the packages it provides so that you can interact with the services that it provides you. So it's got a package which is all of the user methods, how to create a user, how to delete a user, how to add a user to a group, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, create a group, delete a group, etc., etc. So it loads them all initially, but typically once you've worked out what services you want, you go through and you remove the packages that you don't want, just to lighten it up. Yeah. But then at the very end, we should see that it loaded. Let me bring this up. Let me zoom in a little bit. Actually, that's probably a bit hard to read. Okay, that might be a bit better. You'll see that down the bottom here, it's loading our project4.bpl. Yeah. With our resource called ADUG, and it's found our endpoints, get item, post, put item, and delete item. Yep. And it even shows you that for the get method, the path that it's expecting it on is ADUG. Yeah. So let's use that. Let me close the magnifier. Up here, we can open a browser, and it defaults to calling our server and just reporting the version that it finds of RAD server. Yeah. It also logs out that you can see the request came in. Let me just zoom in again. Yeah, you can see it got a request for the version endpoint. Yeah, with no user. This one didn't require authentication. So we've opened our browser. So let's use that ADUG path that it was talking about. So let's send a GET request to our ADUG resource. Yep. And we got back just this string called ADUG. Why did we get that? Well, that's because this really stupid code in here, that's all it's doing. It's creating a JSON object with ADUG in it. Yeah, not terribly interesting, but that's kind of the end-to-end process of getting started with it. Yeah. If I stop this and shut it down, if instead you wanted to debug, well, it's just like debugging any other Delphi app. Set a breakpoint, run it in debug mode instead, wait for it to start up, and then when did I put that in get? Yes, I did. So when your browser sends a get request, let's just refresh that one, our breakpoint fires and we can start stepping through it. Yeah. So it's pretty simple. Yeah. But granted, this is a pretty simple example. Yeah. So let's make a less simple example. Let's make something a little bit more interesting. Let's get some data out of a database. Yeah. So if we have a look, I'm going to use Interbase just because I've already got it running, and I'm running all of this in a VM on my laptop, so I don't want to start up another database. But really, you can use whatever. Well, I was about to say you can use whatever FireDAC database you like, but actually you're not limited to FireDAC. You can use whatever data access library you like in Delphi. Yeah. In this case, I'm going to use Interbase, and I'm going to talk to this employee database. Yeah. So you can see here we've got country, customer, department, employee. We can see the fields in it. Yeah. If we have a look at the employee, actually customer, we probably want to have a look at. If we have a look, we can see we've got various data in that. Yeah. So let's use this data to let's expose this data through RAD server. And what I'm going to do the next few demos, I'm going to go through a few different ways of exposing data through RAD server, starting with kind of the simplest way, the least effort, but also the least control, through to gradually putting a little more effort in and getting more control so that I can get more, customize the result that goes out. Yeah. Then I promise you we'll get beyond databases. We'll look at how we can use it without databases as well. Okay, so instead of this one, let's create a RAD server. Oh, and you can put multiple resources inside your project.
Medicines. I forgot about them for tea too.
Sorry, say again? Was that directed at me or maybe not? Okay. So let's create a resource. What will I call it? I'm going to expose the customer table. So I'll call it my, let's get wacky. Let's call it my CRM resource. Yep, I'll make it a database. I'm not going to do the sample endpoints, but instead, the first time around, I'm going to just use this option to generate database endpoints. Yeah. So I'll say next. It wants me to specify the connection name. It's reading all of these different connections from the same place. It's got all of these that it gets it for the Data Explorer. So if you set up your connection in your Data Explorer, you'll be able to access it here. So let's say I've got my employee. This is the login to Interbase, and I want to expose my customer table. Okay. Let's do sales as well. Okay. Let's click finish. And let's have a look at what we got. Ignore these two components for the time being. What we've got, in this case, it's created our FireDAC components for us. Like I said, you can use other data access libraries, but obviously Embarcadero's wizards are going to push Embarcadero's data access library. Yeah. So we've got a FireDAC connection talking to our employee database. We've got a FireDAC query called customer. And if we have a look at this one, it's pretty simple. It's really just a select star from customer. It does have this optional piece that I'll show you about where you can specify a sort order. But we'll see that. But when we first run it, it'll just be this piece, select star from customer. Okay. and we can execute that to see the data there if we want to. Yeah. And it's got the same thing for sales as well. There's a query editor, just select star from sales. Yeah. All right. So far, there's nothing there that's particular to RAD server. And in fact, this thing that it's sitting on, like we saw before, is just a data module. Yeah. So it's not even a special RAD server thing. The only thing that makes this RAD server are those attributes that we saw before. You sprinkle these attributes through to say this is a resource. Yeah. And then in this case, because we want to expose these queries or these data sets, we've got these components called EMS dataset resource. Right? Remember, EMS is the old name for RAD server. So this is just saying, this is an adapter, if you like, that creates dynamically a resource based on the data set that you connect it to. Yeah. And so we've got one for customer that's connected to our query. There's a bunch of options in here that we can use, whether we want paging enabled, whether when we create a new what's this customer, when we create a new customer, whether we want it in the return to specify the ID of it, a few other things like that. We can also specify a page size. I might just make that smaller so that we can see paging in work. I'm not sure we've got 50 records in the customer table. And then the same thing for sales, but this one's connected up to our query here. Yeah. If you have a look down here, whereas before we had all of those get and put and post and delete methods, we don't have any. There's actually no real code in this data module. Yeah. Instead of having those methods, we've put attributes in front of these dataset resources to say, okay, expose this dataset resource as the sales resource. Yeah. And I'll just make it lowercase. It really annoys me that it makes it uppercase.
So, Malcolm, quick question.
Yeah.
This data set resource is pretty much like a dataset provider or TXML dataset provider for BizNet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Similar sort of concept.
Mm.
Okay. And so if we want to, like I said, I'm starting with the simplest, quickest, but lowest control example. If we want to, that's all we need to do. Yeah. We can run this. This is a FireDAC thing, not a RAD server thing. It wants to add a few packages. Okay, so just agree. Loads all of those ones we saw before. Loads the ADUG one that we created earlier. Yeah, so you can have multiple you can have your business logic spread across multiple BPL files and decide which ones you want to load. But it then also loads our CRM. Let me zoom in. It then loads our, where are we? There we go. Loads our CRM package. Yeah. And you can see it's found a bunch of resources. It's our customer resource, and it's found a list, a get, a put, a post, and a delete. And it's for our sales, it's found a list, get, put, post, and delete. Yep. And it's, again, it's telling us the path. So the path to our list customers is that one, CRM/customers/. Yeah. How did it decide which of these to, how did it decide to expose all these different ones? That's in the, sorry, wrong button. That's in this dataset resource. So notice up the top, allowed actions. By default, we've allowed it to do list, get, post, put, and delete. But if this is a resource, for example, it's going to be read-only, you can just turn off the delete verb, and you won't expose, it won't respond to that type of request. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, have I still got it running? Yes, I have. All right. So let's try talking to it. Let's open up our browser. And the path it told me was CRM/customers. Yeah. Okay. So what we get back is every record, because we just did select star from customers, every record in my customers table as JSON. So notice it starts out with a JSON array, yeah, and then a JSON object for each record. And so there's the first one, customer number, each of the fields in there, yeah. But remember, we also had that ability to, when I zoomed in, I can zoom in again if you like, but we've said basically list all of the customers here. We also want to be able to just pull out a single customer. So let's do this with customer 1004. So we can still do CRM customers, but then we type in 1004 and we get just that single customer returned. Yeah. Now, there were a few other options that it enabled for us. If we have a look in the options, we had enable paging. Yep, and I set the page size to 5. Right? So if we, where's my browser? There it is. If we specify that we want our list of customers, yeah, but we don't want all of them. We just want the first page. Yeah, so I can say, using a URL parameter, I can just say page equals 1, for example. Yep, and we just get the first 5. Or I can say page equals 2, or page equals 3. I don't actually know how many records we have, so I don't know how many pages we're going to get. Do we get a page 6? No. Okay, so less than 6 pages. Yeah? Less than 5. Make sense? So paging, you can just sort of turn on. Yeah. If you remember, the other thing that was in there was when we looked at the customer query, it had this sort of optional stuff there for sorting. Yeah. If we enable sorting, it'll specify an order by. So let's have a look at how we do that. If you have a look in this resource, we've enabled sorting, yeah, there. And then further down, we can specify a sorting param prefix, so SF, yeah. What's that for? Well, you can specify, let's say we want to sort by country, yeah, or city. Let's do city. There's probably a bigger variety of cities listed in here, maybe. So let's still do page. Page equals 1 we'll get, and then we'll also want to sort. Yeah, so I'll say ampersand. That prefix that we specified was SF. Yeah, so you can change it, but it was SF. And then we want to specify the name of the field we want to sort by. So we can say SF, what did I say? City. City equals, and then either put in an A for ascending order or D for descending order. So let's do descending order sorted by city. So we've got Zurich, then Turtle Island, then Tokyo, San Diego, Pebble Beach, and then it stops because we've said paging of 5. Yeah, if we get rid of that page, we should get all of them, but sorted in that order. Yeah, make sense? So we've kind of got a fair amount of functionality with very little effort. We didn't actually write any code. Yeah. Now, a couple of things. Obviously, we've been leveraging the URL because we're accessing a resource, and the URL stands for Universal Resource Locator or location or something. So we're leveraging the URL, including the URL parameters that we're used to when we use a web browser. Yeah. However, so far, all we've done are gets. Yeah. We've said, get this, get that. That's fine, but it's not very interesting. The problem is that doing things other than a get is a bit difficult in the, well, no, actually deletes and that sort of stuff are fine. But doing get is the easiest one to do because you can just do it in the address bar of your browser. Yeah. Fortunately, there are tools to let you test REST APIs without writing a client. Yeah, we'll see how to write a client in a minute. But if you come to, there's a bunch of them around. Postman is one that's quite popular, but one comes with Delphi called the REST debugger. Yeah, and so if we bring this up, this is not specific to RAD server. You can use this for any REST interface. Yeah, but we'll use it with RAD server. So let's just set it up. We're going to send a GET request to, what was it, localhost 8080. And I always forget, I have to put the HTTP in. Okay, so we're sending it to localhost 8080, which is where this is running. So 8080. Yep. We'll get back to content type later on. Parameters. So the resource we want to access was CRM/customers. Yeah, that'll do us. And we'll add some parameters in a second as well. If you were using authentication, you could turn it on here and then select the type of authentication you're using, but we're not at the moment. If you're using a proxy or whatever, you can specify all of that here. But once we've done this, we can just send that request. And we can see here we got back a 200, which means it's okay. It ran successfully. We can see the body of the JavaScript that we're getting back, or that, sorry, not the JavaScript, the JSON that we're getting back. We can also see that as tabular data. Yeah, so we can see a grid view of the data we're getting back. Unfortunately, it defaults to rich. It tries to guess about how to interpret the JSON that comes back. I'm struggling to think of a time when I wanted it to treat it as anything other than JSON. Yeah, but it always seems to default to rich. So if you change it to JSON and apply that, you'll get all of the records. It gets hung up when you've got numbers that come through, but they're actually strings. Like the first few of these postcodes are fine, and then so it thinks it's a number, and then it hits this one with an M in it and freaks out and sort of stops. But if you change it to JSON, it then understands and gives you all of it. Yeah. So that's great, but all of that does exactly what I did a second ago. Yeah. What it now lets me do is not just do a GET, but I can also, for example, do a POST. Yeah. So POST, where I'm going to create a new customer. Yeah. So it's the same resource that I'm sending it to. Yeah. But I need to do, I need to specify the body. Yeah, I need to put my JSON in the body of the request that I'm sending across. Yeah. So I also need to tell it that the body is JSON. Yeah, because remember, it can be XML, it can be all sorts of things. So the content type, I'm going to select application JSON, and my body, let me copy this so you don't all have to painfully sit there and watch me type. The customer I'm going to create is in this JSON. So we'll have a look at it. So I've got a JSON object with a customer number, 1016. I think the biggest one we've got is 1015 currently. Customer, first name, last name, city and country. And then we close off the JSON object. Yeah. So I think, if I haven't forgotten, we should be able to just send that request over. But now it's not a GET request. Remember, we sent a GET request. It gave us back the information. This is a creation request. Yeah. No, it isn't actually. But I didn't do that on purpose. But it's good to see. It actually gave us back the error. Yeah. Remember, if we go back to my server, let me zoom in. When I send a POST request, yeah, where are we? Customer, POST, method, POST, path, CRM, customers. No, actually, I'm wrong. I thought it was complaining that it wanted the ID. Okay, maybe I should read the error message better. What did I get back? Update table does not have primary key or row identifier. Record has been changed by deleted. Is that because I ran it earlier and I already used 1016? Let's send it again. No. What do I need to give it? I'm going to need to give it 1016. 1017. Not found. Okay. Well, demo gods don't like me today. What I should be able to do, and what I did earlier, was post that and have it get actually created in our database. Yeah. Anyway, you can download the source code and run it, and it'll probably work for you. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. Actually, that might be related to why I've got a problem. Anyway, so let me close this one down. So that was, remember, the point of that one was that it was easy, but it was not a lot of control. I had a few parameters or properties I could change on my dataset resource, but really I didn't have that much control over what was going on. You know, there's one event that I can get access to when it wants to grab a parameter, but I don't have an awful lot of control. Yeah. So let's do a slightly more involved version. Yeah. Not too much more effort, but a little bit more effort, but a lot more control. Yeah. Okay. Oh, actually, how are we doing for time? Probably not so good. One of the things I was going to show you, and I'll do it in the next one. Okay. So let's open a new project. I won't build this one in front of you. I'll open one that I built earlier, and you guys have got access to all of this source code. Yeah. So let's open. I just did REST debugger. So let's use FireDAC still, but I want to use a couple of different ways to do it to give a bit more control over things. Yeah. So we've got our FireDAC package, FireDAC. I always call it FireDAC. So let's open it up. Why is that employee connection active? Shouldn't be active. Okay. Yeah, that's not active. Good. So ignore these ones for a second. We'll come back to those. But at its surface, we've got an employee connection and our employee query. Yeah, so TFD query, just like before. Yeah. Query editor, just doing select star from employee, nothing terribly difficult or exciting. Yeah. However, this time I have created, rather than putting on an EMS dataset resource, I've created a get method, yep, on my FireDAC resource, yep, like we saw before. And if we have a look at the code for that, I'm not just letting it generate it automatically. I'm writing the code to fill out the body, yeah. But I'm leveraging some pieces of RAD server to make it easy. Yeah. So you could obviously do anything you like in here to your data set in order to enable it and get the query back that you want. But then once you've got it, if you then want to convert it to JavaScript and send it, sorry, yeah, not JavaScript. I keep saying JavaScript. Convert it to JSON and send it back to the client. All you need to do, one way to do it, I'll show you a few, is we can define a stream, just a memory stream. Yep. The response that got passed in here. So remember, we get our request, and what we're trying to do in here is fill the response. So the response.body, we can load that body from a stream. So we're calling set stream on the body of our response, passing in the memory stream we just created and telling it that it's going to be JSON. Yeah. And this is just saying that the response should own the memory stream so that when it's finished building and sending the response, it can free the memory stream. Yeah. Then the rest is just data sets. We're just opening our employee. Yeah. Set whatever parameters, filters, whatever you want to do on your query. Here, we're just opening it. And then we're saying employee query.save to stream and saving it into our memory stream and telling it that we want it saved as JSON. Yeah. And that's it. So we can now have more control over how we build up that data set and where we get it from, but still relatively easily pour it into the response and send it back to the client. Yeah, I'll come back to this other one in a second, but let me run this so we can see it. So we can see down here that it's loaded our FireDAC resource. If I click open browser, okay, and put in the path that it's told me, the resource path is just FireDAC. So if we do that, it's, let me shrink all of this up. It's built that JSON, but you'll see it's got a lot of stuff in here. Yeah. So for example, it's got FDBS version 16 manager, blah, 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 table list. And then inside of here, we've got all details of our query. We've got a column list. So it's got all of the metadata of our data set. Yeah. Like for example, there's a column called job code. It's an ANSI string. It's this size, blah, 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 whole bunch of information. Yeah. And then finally down the bottom, we get, oh, it's got any constraints. It's got any views. And then we've got our actual list of data. Yeah. What we've basically done, if you remember the code, we told it to save the entire employee query to the stream. Yeah. Not just the results, but the entire query. Yeah. All of the fields that are defined on it, everything. Yeah. So this may not be what we want. It might be. Yeah. If we have a look at our browser, what's an example of when you might want all of this? Well, if your client, if you know your client was Delphi or CBuilder, and you wanted to be able to take this entire packet of JSON and just load it into a FireDAC mem table on the client side, then this would actually be really easy because you've got all the column definitions and everything in here. So you could just take a totally blank mem table, load it from this JSON, and bang, you're away to go, and you can start editing it. Yeah. So that's fine if you know your client is Delphi. But part of the value of REST is that we don't only want Delphi clients. We want lots of other stuff. And giving all of this column information to a Objective-C client on iOS may not be at all what they want or need. Yeah. So instead, there's another way of providing it. If you remember, I also on this data module had some other components. Yeah. So in this case, I'm using some FireDAC components called a batch move. A batch move's job is just to move data from a source to a destination. Yeah. It calls them a reader and a writer, but it's basically a source and a destination. So, and what those readers and writers are, you can vary. So maybe you're moving data from a CSV file, which is your source, and the destination is a SQL Server database. Yeah. Or maybe you're moving it from a SQL Server database source to a Firebird destination. Yeah. So, or a text file or JSON or XML or all sorts of things. Yeah, there's a bunch of different reader components. Here we've got a dataset reader component. So the source of our data is going to be a dataset, and our writer component is a JSON writer. Yeah, so we're using the batch move component to move data from a dataset to a JSON document. Yeah. Now, the nice thing about batch move is it doesn't just move it, you can define a bunch of mappings. Yeah. So that you can transform the data along the way. You can say this field is a number, but we're going to move it to this string field, or this is a date time and we want to split it so it goes into a date field and a time field, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So you can define a bunch of mappings. So we're going to use this in this case. Yeah. So we've got this batch move. The dataset reader is pointing at our same employee query, and our writer is we've set up as a JSON writer. Yeah. So if we have a look at this get batch move method, yeah, which we've said we'll use the batch move resource suffix. So get batch move, we have a look at it. all it's doing is it first says, okay, the JSON writer, where do we want it to spit its JSON out to? Well, we want it to spit it out into the response body. Yep. So we're saying the JSON writer property of our destination component, if you like, is actually pointing to the JSON writer property of our body, our response body. Okay. And then we just call batch move one.execute, and it starts the job of reading from the data set and writing out to that JSON writer, which actually outputs it into our response body. Yeah. So it's still running. So if I, instead of calling FireDAC, if I call, yeah, go away. If I call FireDAC batch move, I think was the resource suffix. Was it batch move? Let me have a look. Batch move. FireDAC batch move. Oh, okay. I think there's no delivery on the end of it. If we do batch move, we get out just the data set, the data. Whereas here we got out the whole component and the columns and all the metadata. Here we just get the data. Here's the first record. Here's the second record, third record, fourth record, etc., etc. Yep. So again, you get more control here because we're pointing, if you remember, our batch move component at our query component. So you can set up your query however you like to generate whatever subset of data you want to supply, use parameters, use macros, use all that stuff. And then your batch move reader component will just read from that and output it to JSON. Okay. Okay. So it's a bit more effort than the last one, but it's more control, right? Okay. Let's do one more, and then I think you're all getting sick of me. All right. We'll do one more database. So let's open another project. This one is going to take it one step further. This one is going to, actually, I think I'm going to take a little diversion. So before I come back to the last database one where we have lots of control, but there's a bit more effort. Before we do that, I want to just take a little detour into writing JSON. Yeah. So what we've seen so far is that what we have, we've got these methods, these get JSON writer, get JSON builder, whatever. We get methods, for example, or post methods and all that sort of stuff. And our job in the get method is to do whatever we want to do and then generate JSON to send back. So it's probably worth looking at some of your options for generating JSON. Yeah, we've seen some ways to do it automatically, but sometimes you're going to need to generate it and have like control. You could just write a big string. I guess you could use the old page producer components from the web broker days. They don't have to generate HTML. They can generate any text document. So you could use them to generate your JSON if you wanted. But I want to show 3 different ways of generating JSON, all that come in the box. Yeah. So I'll run this and show it to you first, and then we'll have a quick look at the code. Oh, I didn't close my last one. Okay, let's close that. Now let's run this. Okay. The path is test.json. Okay. So let's copy that. Let's open our browser. We'll close some of these tabs. Okay, so let's do test.json. And so all we're getting back is we've got this JSON object, and it's got the first name value pair in it is a name of colors, and the value is an array, and each item in that array is another JSON object. Yep. So it's an array of colors. The first JSON object has name value pairs for red, hex values, and that sort of stuff. And then the second JSON object has blue. Yeah. And each of these 3 methods I'm going to show you will generate that same JSON document, but just in a different way. Yeah. So let's look at this first one that we just invoked. Yeah, that's this get JSON one. So let's have a look at it. This is using the system.json unit that comes with Delphi and CBuilder. And as you can see, this is what's involved in using it. So you create this tJSON object.create, and we're storing that in this JSON red. And then we're adding name value pairs to it by calling JSON red.add pair. And that's how we're adding, whoops, undo that. That's how we're adding, you know, name is red, hex is that, default is false, blah, blah, blah. Then we're creating another, so that first one, JSON red, now holds basically this JSON object up to there. Yeah. Then we're going to create this next one, this blue. So we do the same thing, JSON object create, store it in that, and we add pairs for each of them. Yeah. So now we got those two objects. Then we're going to create a JSON array. Yeah, and add those two to it. So we've got JSON red, JSON blue. So that JSON array variable now holds that, basically, just that piece. Yeah. Then we create another JSON object and we add a pair to it where the name is colors and the value is that JSON array that we just created. So that's how we get this colors piece with that array after it. Yeah. Make sense? And then once we've done all of that, the last thing we do is we say a response.body.setValue, and we pass in the JSON object, and we specify true, saying that the response should own this object and free it when it's finished with it. Okay. And as you can see, that works. But to me, and this is maybe personal preferences, it's really clumsy. I've got to think about what I want. This is going to sound terrible. I've got to think about the whole structure of what I want first and almost create it in reverse. I created all the children first and then added them to the parents and then added them to the grandparent. Yeah. So to me, I don't really like this. Another way of doing it, exact same document, is to use, what's the next one we're going to do? Is to use a JSON writer. We saw the JSON writer a little bit a second ago. So this is a different resource that we're accessing. Or sorry, it's not a different resource, but it's a different get method that we're accessing. Same document, yeah. But this time we're using this JSON writer. Yeah, and this is one that comes as part of RAD server because it's part of this response object, this T endpoint response. You can see we've got a variable and we set it to a response.body.JSON writer. Yep. And then we say writer.write the start of an object. The property name is colors. And then we write the start of an array and the start of an object. So we're actually kind of walking down in order. So we started an object. That's that guy there. Yep, that piece. And then we put in the property name of colors. And then we created the array. We started the array. And then we started an object. And then we're writing the property name and the value red. Yeah, so we're kind of walking through all the way, doing it piece by piece. Yeah, but we're doing it in order. So maybe it makes more sense to you. Yep, and all the way through properties. And then when we get down to, where's the browser? Where is it? There it is. So we've been starting objects, starting arrays, starting objects, blah, 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 blah. We get to a point where we need to actually close off one of those objects. And so that's where we write end object. Yeah. And then we write another start object and fill it in and write end object. Yep. And then we write the end of the array and then we write the end of the object. Yep. And we don't have to then do anything with it because remember this writer is actually the writer that's built into the response body. So we're kind of filling up the response body as we go. Yeah. Now, to me, this makes a little bit more sense. It's still really verbose and hard to look at. You know, I look at that and I don't see the document that I've just created. I see a bunch of method calls and I kind of have to squint and almost follow it through to get the object. But at least it's in order, it's not backwards. What I really want is the ability to kind of almost see the document that I'm creating. And so that's where this third option that's in the box comes in. And so if I take this URL and paste it here, but instead of JSON writer, we use JSON builder, I think it is. Okay, same document, but it's using the JSON builder object that comes as part of the system.json.builders unit. And this is a fluent interface. So you can, if you want to, you've probably most of you have seen fluent interfaces before. People either love them or hate them. There's almost nobody who doesn't care for some reason. It looks a bit weird, but when you realize that that is the same as builder.begin object, it's just, you can split it out over multiple lines if you want to. It starts to make a bit more sense. But you can see we say builder, begin object, begin arrays, begin object, add, name red, hex is that, default is that, end the object, begin the next one, blah, 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 end object, end array, end object. To me, I like this better because when I look at that, I don't have to squint very hard to see my my document, the structure of it, and even the name value pairs are next to each other. I don't have to put them together in my mind. So we've created this builder and filled it in, but you notice that when we created the builder, we passed in a writer to the constructor. Well, again, that's just the writer in the response. Our RAD server response object. So once we've done the builder, we don't even have to shove it into the response because it writes into it automatically. We pass it the writer. And we can even just free it ourselves at the end. Now, I don't care which one you use. And in fact, you'll probably end up using multiple different times because they're good for different things sometimes. But the point is you can build your JSON document however you like. It's just text. You can type it you can add it into a big string if you want. Just concatenate strings. Doesn't really matter. It's just about building JSON. Now, why did I take you this little detour? Because I want to show you the last demo probably that we'll do, and then I'll shut up. If I open it up, we're going to go back to the database, but I want to do one which I think is a bit more real world, and a bit more like what we've done in projects with people and that sort of thing. So let's open this one up. And I think I said before, you guys have got access to all these examples, so you can download them and play with them and break them and do whatever you like. Okay, so let's we'll pull those out of the way for the moment. Let's have a look at what we've got. We've got our FireDAC connection. We've got a customer query. We've got a sales query, but we've got these set up in a master detail relationship. So if we have a look at the sales query, you can see we've got select star from sales where customer number equals this parameter, equals customer number, and we've got data source. Okay, sorry, we've got our query. We've got a data source here pointing to our master, our customer, and then our query should point to our data source somewhere down here. Here we go. So there's our master source is DS customer, and the master fields are customer number. So we've got a master detail relationship. Now, nothing there is anything to do with RAD server. You've probably got, even if you're not using FireDAC, you're using something else, you've probably got a similar structure on some of your data modules. And this is where the ability to kind of expose data module, take data modules that you've already got and reuse them and repurpose them into your REST server starts to come in. All we've done to that is added a couple of these EMS dataset resources that we saw before, one pointing at our customer and one pointing at our sales. The master detail relationship isn't defined at this level. It's defined up at the data source level. Yeah. So let's have a look at the source code for this. It's a little bit more of a blend of the two approaches we've seen so far. So you can see here's our customer dataset resource. And we're just, for this one, we're just doing the no source code example that we saw before. There's just a resource suffix attribute, giving it the name of customers in front of it. So there's no get methods down here for that customer resource. Yeah, it's just the exact example we saw before. And in fact, let me run it just quickly. And if I have a look at the path is, where are we? Test customers. Yeah, okay. So if we go test customers, we get exactly what we saw before. We get our thing, and we could do the page and the sorting and all that stuff that we saw before. Yeah, so nothing different there. We've then also got our dataset resource for sales. Yeah, and this is a little different. It's still a no-code version, but we've got a lot more attributes in front of it. Yeah, so we've got the attribute that we used before, that we saw in the earlier version, where we say, okay, if you want the sales for this customer, then you use this URL, the customers slash, and then the customer number slash sales. Yeah. So there's no, and still no code. So for example, if we did, I don't know, 1002. So let's do 1002 slash sales. Okay. These are all the sales in that sales table, and you'll notice they're all for customer 1002. Yeah. And in fact, we can go further if we have a look. So the sales resource, we've then got a bunch of resource suffixes that hang off that, because they're defined immediately afterwards. It's basically sort of appending these to the end of it. So if we say customers, customer number, sales, and then just the closing slash, we'll get a list. Yeah. If we instead put customers, customer number, sales, slash, and then the PO number, we can get a specific PO out of the list of sales. Yep. So you can have multiple parameters passed in your URL. So PO number, if I go back to my browser, let's grab this PO number here. Yep. So let me copy that. So I'll go customers 1002 sales, and then just, I only want that specific PO number. Oh, I've buggered it up. All right. Well, what it should have pulled out for me is just that piece. Yeah, just that specific purchase order number. Just like when we said customers 1002, it only gave us the one customer rather than the whole list. Yeah. And the same, we can do post. But they'll both get. We can do a post to create a new sale. Yeah. We can do a put to update an existing sale, and we can do a delete to delete an existing sale. Yeah. Again, no other source code required, but a bit more control over what we're exposing. Yeah. Earlier, we could do all of those things, but we just used the properties in the resource where it said get, put, delete, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This time we want to actually control the URL, so we can have multiple parameters, customer number and PO number. Yep. The default out of the box stuff, just turning on those properties, won't handle two parameters. It'll only pull the one parameter out. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty good. Then in addition to that no code stuff, we've got a bunch of custom resources as well. So for example, we've got one here where we put in slash customers details. Yeah. And this will execute this method. And we can have a look at the source code, but basically it's going to return, rather than, so far we've been getting customers in one request and a sale in the other request. This will actually return a customer and then nested within it the sales for that customer. Yeah. So it's much better than sending 2 requests, get your customer, and then get all the sales for that customer. Much more efficient to just send 1 request and say, get me the customers and the sales for this customer. Yeah. So if I say customer details, I should be able to get that. So test customers, customers details. Oh, my database has fallen over. Let's just stop it. Start it. That's why I got that error earlier. Okay, and we'll just quickly stop this and restart it just in case. Let's have another go. Yeah, here we go. So you'll notice we're getting the full list of all of our customers, but for each one, we're getting the customer details and then nested within it all of the sales for that customer. Yeah. And this can still be read-write. Yeah. So you can get that packet down and then maybe make some changes in the customer or in the sales and send it back as an update. Yeah. And when you send it back, you only have to send back the ones that you're changing. You don't have to send back everything. Yeah. But it's just much more efficient. A single packet of information coming down rather than multiple requests and multiple packets. Make sense?
Malcolm, is it possible to just send the attributes that have changed?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you do a put, if I always get put and post mixed up, but put I think is the update. So for example, if we were putting a customer and we wanted to change the contact's city from San Diego to Sydney, we could just send in, you have to send in enough information to identify it. So in this case, we'd still have to send the customer number and then we could just send the city and we wouldn't have to send the other stuff. Yeah. Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. And same, we could send in just the customer number. If we wanted to update, say, this sale, we could send in the customer number, none of this stuff, but then have a sales array with only this first one in it, and we'd send in the PO number and then the field or fields that we wanted to change, not necessarily the whole thing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So I can rabbit on more, but I think you're all sick of me and it's getting late. So a couple of things. I came into this wanting to show you that most of this you kind of already know. Yeah. All of the database stuff, you already know that. Well, unless you don't work with databases, maybe you do something else. But for those guys who are doing Delphi stuff with databases, you already know how to do the database stuff, so you don't have to change that. All that you then have to add on is exposing it through REST. Yeah. And so, like I said before, we've got customers who've had, 20-year-old client server applications with data modules and all this sort of stuff, hanging around forever. We've helped them kind of take those data modules and also pull them over into a RAD server project. And then I don't recommend that you take a 20-year-old data module and just dump a few resources on it and say, woohoo, we've got a REST API. But, you probably want to go through and make sure that your data module isn't opening all of these queries when it's created and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But with not that many changes and adding resources and resource components, dataset resources and methods, you can kind of take that existing source code and start exposing it out through the web, through a REST interface. Yeah. We've done this with about 4 or 5 customers now, and we're not the only ones. Other people are doing it as well. Yeah. So it's actually not that hard to get started. Like anything, it's deep, so you'll continue to learn, but don't feel like you've got to climb this mountain to even begin. Yeah. Now, with that in mind, I have one slide that final slide that I want to show you. Let me, does this let you start from anywhere but the beginning? Let me just quickly get to the last one. Okay, so where do you get more resources? So if you go to this link, and that QR code contains this link. You'll get all of the source code that I showed tonight, plus some more that I didn't show. There'll be also links to this new white paper that, well, it's kind of new old white paper that Embarcadero have done. Years ago, David I wrote a white paper called the RAD Server Technical Guide that basically walked you through from building your first Hello World app right through to deployment. Yeah. But it's getting a bit old. It was written for EMS. There's a bunch of new features that have come out since then. So Embarcadero have started updating it. So as well as a link to David I's version, there's also a link to this new updated version, part 1 of it. It goes a little bit further than we've gone tonight. It basically goes through everything we've done tonight, plus a little bit more, plus deployment. It talks about how to deploy this thing out to your customers. They're working on part 2 at the moment, updating the rest of David's white paper. So there's links to that. So I really recommend that one. It's basically like a book that you can get and read through. And there's also some other links up there for stuff. Yep. So that QR code or that link will take you there. The other thing that I kind of remembered after this slide, I'll finish this. There's also our contact details there if you want to have a chat about anything. But the other thing that I forgot to put on this slide until after was there's also a really great video on YouTube you should watch when you get a chance. It's, where's my keyboard? Oh, I'm not in Windows. Okay, let me go back into Windows. Yeah, that's why I couldn't find Chrome. There's a video up on YouTube, and I'll grab this URL and I'll stick it in the chat window, actually, which is a case study that Stephen and Antonio's the guy at Embarcadero who's been updating David's white paper. So when you grab that RAD Server Technical Guide, Antonio's being the one updating it. So this is a white paper, a case study that Stephen and Antonio have done about building a real-life RAD server application. When Antonio joined Embarcadero last year sometime, he's been a Delphi guy for decades, but when he joined Embarcadero, he'd never touched RAD server, never even seen it. And so the first thing, Stephen's his boss, and a little bit cruel, I think, the first thing that Stephen got him to do was to build an application in RAD server. And so he went from, not knowing how to spell RAD server to building this application over the coming weeks. And so then it's an event management application with VCL clients and mobile clients, Android and iOS. And Embarcadero in Europe use it for all of their events. So if you go to an Embarcadero event in London, for example, when you register, it'll get, there's a web interface as well. So when you go to the website and register, it'll use RAD server and go into the system. The people in the Embarcadero office can use a VCL application to look at who's registered and send them extra, resources and stuff. And then the actual attendees have a mobile app that they can use to show up and show that they've registered and get scanned in. Yep. So this takes you through the process of Antonio, how he built it, what he learned along the way, given that he wasn't a RAD server guy, and basically how he went from never having done REST through to building this application that they're now using at all of their events. So definitely worth a watch. It's less than an hour long. Cast it to your telly and grab yourself a drink, and fun for the whole family. I'm sure your kids would love to watch it. All right, and that's kind of it. So let me put that other slide back up just in case you didn't get that link. But are there any questions? There we go.
Yeah, I've got a question. Has anyone tried to support an IApp server interface that way? I'm talking about kind of not only doing the master detail like we've seen now, but also knowing about the fact that inserts on the master need to happen first and then on the detail, the order of things, so that the log of the delta is kept, plus what we are using heavily in DataSnap is propagate changes. So there are columns on the server side that get updated as part of the Delta processing, and without us writing a single line of code, we will have that stuff in the client data set.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if something like that exists, because that's not what normally JSON, what the REST interface does, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen something like that, and I think it would be potentially complicated because of, you know, the having all these different languages as potential clients. You know, you're not just writing a Delphi front end to it. You'd need to have other front ends to it as well. You know, JavaScript front ends and libraries, I should say, not front ends, JavaScript libraries and you know, Objective-C and Swift and Java and C# and all these other things, you know. So I guess it's that trade-off. I haven't seen it, and I suspect it's probably because of that trade-off where they want to try and keep this being client agnostic.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a shame. I mean, that is one thing that DataSnap has over this, which is, you know, just because they kind of know for the most part that both sides are RAD server, RAD Studio. They can go to town with intelligence on both sides.
I mean, the components you've shown us for the EMS data provider, right, could easily serve just a metadata without giving data around.
Yeah.
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 In order to find out what are the fields and build the fields on the client side, right? If you're Delphi client, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. One of those examples actually sent the data and the metadata, so it's probably pretty easy to turn off the data.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But no, I haven't seen that. It may exist, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions from anyone? No? Everyone just wants to be let go.
Just a very quick one.
Yes.
At the beginning, when you're describing the architecture of the thing, is it the equivalent of a domain-driven model?
A lot of people it doesn't have to be, but a lot of people do use domain-driven design to work out what their resources are and to sort of structure that, how the resources are related to each other.
Right.
So you don't have to, but it is quite a nice fit.
Got you.
Yeah. In fact, I remember when I first got introduced to REST, I was a little bit skeptical about it all, because I remember having a chat with someone at a conference, and my position, I guess I was playing the grumpy old man, which I play pretty easily. And I was kind of saying, well, look, we're just reinventing the same stuff we've been inventing for ages. You know, this is just, you know, 30 years ago, whenever it was, 20 years ago, when I joined Borland, one of the first products that I got to work on was this product called Entera. And then Visi, which was for doing distributed systems like this. And then VisiBroker, Corba came along and was going to change the world because we were now distributing objects.
Right.
Yep. It was the flavor of the month for 5 years or whatever it was. And then suddenly everyone realized that, oh, distributing objects is a really bad idea, doesn't scale very well. And then they moved off that. And then to me, REST just seemed like, from my uneducated, cranky position, it just seemed like distributed objects all over again, except we're calling them resources. And I said this to someone at a conference, and fortunately they didn't just laugh at me and walk away. They actually educated me and said, but the big difference is those objects, they're not objects, and you can use domain-driven design to work out what the right boundaries are. So they're much coarser grained things. You know, you're not distributing these little objects and having these really chatty conversations across the internet. You're distributing more coarser grained domain objects. Yep. And so the chat should be minimized. So, yeah. Anyway.
I've got another question about the possibility to check for data types that are valid. I remember BizSnap and our WSDL for XML documents, right? And XML interfaces. And the WSDL helped you to identify if it's a valid request and if the return types are actually correct that are coming back. Do we have any type security with that stuff, or do we suffer from the same JavaScript problems with REST?
I think from memory, it's a while since I did WSDL and stuff, but that was all based on like XML schemas and stuff, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was at least more Pascal-like, because
Yeah.
you could check that the data type is of that type, and that had to come back, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen a few people trying to, because there are JSON schemas. I don't know that they're terribly widely adopted, or even if they're actually part of the standard, or if they're kind of this side thing that people have built. But there is this concept of a JSON schema, and I've seen people trying to apply it in REST to do exactly that, to kind of validate these things before you submit them and before you send them across, or after you've received them, validate that they're right. But I kind of haven't seen it get wide adoption yet, so I suspect it's still maybe too early, or maybe it's just that you know, all the hipster developers are happy with everything being loose and unverified, and it's just experienced guys like us who think that strong typing's kind of good.
Yeah, not us. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I don't know. All right. Any other questions, guys? No? All right. Well, I've put the link, the YouTube link to that case study video in the chat window. Otherwise, grab that. If you, for whatever reason, if you can't get that, or you forget that URL for all of those resources and the source code and everything, just flick us an email and we'll send it out to you. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you, Mark.
Malcolm.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Malcolm.